Tonight, we're investigating the pattern of problems plaguing Cleveland police and uncovering the solutions that will bring changes for everyone from the command staff to the police on the streets. And that's where we go next. Cleveland is now the 20th city in the country to have its department come under federal scrutiny. Cities like Seattle, New Orleans, and Los Angeles have all gone through the federal consent decree process. But it's Detroit that most closely parallels what Cleveland is likely to experience over the next 5 years. Investigator Joe Paganakis traveled to the Motor City and heard from the men and women on the streets about what to expect.
Police officers here in Cleveland need to just look across Lake Erie to the city of Detroit for answers as to what it's like to deal with federal oversight of the department. We traveled to Detroit and found out it's not an easy process, one that's filled with hidden costs, mixed results, and could last up to a decade. It's a familiar scene. The streets look almost the same.
How old is she?
7.
And if you didn't know,
Somebody went out in front of her, so she had to swerve to avoid them.
you might think this is Cleveland. Detroit, Michigan, you might say we're cousins. And this Rust Belt family has been through some tough times. Blight, crime, recession, and now a renaissance. And one thing Cleveland can learn from Detroit?
They grow up being scared of the police.
A city's journey through the winding road of a consent decree.
Yeah, everything's good. Yeah.
We're not so used to seeing you guys up here like that. It was like,
Right?
scared us.
In Detroit, that road has been going 12 long years. And for Detroit Police Sergeant Al Ruiz, the federal oversight has been a major adjustment from the beginning.
Me and my partner are pulling up right as this consent decree first started, and we see people coming out of this door right here.
Right.
They had broke in. The place was closed. They had broke in. So we start chasing them. And, you know, I catch the guy, and I remember him trying to punch me, and I'm sitting there defending myself, and I remember thinking, consent decree, and it made me hesitate. And I swore I would never hesitate again, but I remember that. I remember thinking I was going to get in trouble for doing my job.
Sergeant Ruiz is also one of Detroit's community policing officers.
Black male, possibly female, braids to the back, like a blonde puffer coat.
We roll up on 2 Detroit police officers looking for a suspect.
He sweats today, but he's always like kind of creeping, walking back and forth.
The officers don't know they're on camera. Sergeant Ruiz asks them about the consent decree process.
The Department of Justice being here, and
Oh, did it make it better?
did it make the Detroit Police
I
Department
think it
better?
made it better to an extent. You know, I mean, it did. I mean, yeah, certain aspects. Some things got a little too anal, but
Right.
you know, we started to focus on things that weren't the most important, but other situations, yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. And I don't think we felt like that in 2003 when they first got here, huh?
No. You know, we're old salty dogs.
Right.
We don't like change.
All right, guys.
Well, we do get a new water bowl, then we like it.
Right.
Sergeant Ruiz admits federal oversight has had a big impact on many officers on the force, now required to wear body microphones. Training has doubled.
Having to qualify with our weapon every 6 months, as opposed to before it used to be every year. Having to go to training a lot more often, being trained more on culture awareness, being trained more on how to handcuff somebody, being trained more on how to approach people.
But to fully understand this painful, tedious process, we go back to the beginning, a process that nearly derailed several times.
The blue curtain of secrecy is on its way down.
It started in 2003. 17 Detroit police officers arrested on charges of stealing money, planting evidence, and filing false police reports.
The citizens of Detroit will have a police department that is truly a model for the nation.
The Department of Justice charged Detroit police with excessive use of force and unlawful arrests. Many of the same charges leveled against Cleveland police.
It's my job to keep the city safe. I'll do whatever it takes.
But Detroit's Justice Department process became filled with failures. 3 Detroit police chiefs resign amid scandal in just a few years.
And we will not be shamed.
Then Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick convicted on 24 felony counts of corruption, sentenced to 28 years in jail. Detroit's consent decree shattered even further, though, after it was revealed Kilpatrick was having an affair with the person most responsible for overseeing the entire police improvement process, Justice Department Monitor Cheryl Robinson Wood. Wood forced to resign in disgrace.
They killed my niece. The police shot her in her face.
But in 2010, the consent decree process hit rock bottom. 7-year-old Ayanna Jones was shot and killed by an officer during a police raid at the Jones home. Shots fired while police were looking for a suspect. The officer charged with involuntary manslaughter. 2 mistrials. All charges dropped. A city divided. 12 hard years. And after all of that,
there are a lot of problems with the culture of the department.
Ron Scott with the Detroit Coalition Against Police Brutality. He says the Detroit Police Department has a long way to go, claiming officers continue to use racial slurs, excessive force, and illegal search and seizure. He says young black citizens are still being unfairly criminalized.
We're getting a number of people being stopped in cars for various reasons, and the police are running up to people saying, "Where are the drugs, where are the guns? Are you a gang?"
Residents like Mario Maldonado, who grew up in Detroit's 4th Precinct, say not enough has changed.
I still get paranoid. You know, I don't feel safer. I get more paranoid when I see the police rolling by like, oh, they're just looking to stop me for something.
Meanwhile, Detroit's Police Commission reports there are still 1,300 citizen complaints about Detroit police per year. And while Detroit Police Chief James Craig reports a reduction in police fatal shootings to just 17 in the past 5 years, Chief Craig admits there's always concern about regression.
The cultural magnetic draw that drives a police department back into the way business has always been done.
How do you prevent that?
Well, one, you got to continue to hold people accountable.
Meanwhile, back on the streets of Detroit, I ask the key question. Some community leaders say the culture of the Detroit Police Department has not changed enough. How do you answer to that?
I would invite these community leaders to meet us halfway. We in the Detroit Police Department have made a lot of changes.
And Detroit's consent decree has now been lifted. A 1-year transition agreement is now in place. Meanwhile, it's a process that is just getting started here in Cleveland. One of the biggest gaps in training is how officers deal with the mentally ill. And Ron Regan, you uncovered that these deficiencies extend to the highest level of the Cleveland Police Department and even right here to City Hall.
Well, just weeks into our investigation, we spoke with nationally recognized experts on police training based in Memphis, Tennessee, the very same experts Cleveland police are now turning to. It's a city where the blues grew into an icon and a motel balcony that witnessed the assassination of another. But 25 years ago, it also became home to the nation's leading center for police training and the mentally ill. This is Memphis, Tennessee, and what we found here reveals a lot about Cleveland police, excessive force, and an ongoing Department of Justice investigation.
We coined a phrase many years ago, CIT is more than just training.
Major Sam Cochran is a retired Memphis cop. He helped the department launch CIT, Crisis Intervention Teams, the nation's first program teaching cops how to successfully treat the mentally ill instead of arresting them.
We have an individual that has an illness of the brain. I'm afraid some of the attention is get that person off the street and put that person in jail.
I knew I had to keep my hands in front of my body and away from my weapon.
Training videos are used to teach cops how to de-escalate potentially violent scenes.
Why don't you come on down? We're going to help you out here.
Slowing things down, opening up communications is usually at the directions of some level of leadership, and CIT helps to introduce that leadership role.
And it's the identical training program used by Cleveland police for the last 10 years.
Verbal de-escalation will allow the officer to take control with less risk for injury to all parties.
40 hours of classroom training, plus role-playing real-life crises.
We're here to help you, sweetie. We're not here to hurt you. We're just here to find out what's wrong.
I feel stressed.
But police were unable to calm Tanisha Anderson last November. She died in custody while handcuffed and restrained.
If a police department provides that 40-hour training, is that sufficient?
No.
The Department of Justice found serious flaws in how the mentally ill in Cleveland are treated by police.
In this DOJ report, excessive force against persons who are mentally ill or in crisis, including cases where the officers were called exclusively for a welfare check. What red flags does that suggest to you?
As what I just mentioned, probably a level of confidence, lack of confidence.
Cochran believes Cleveland's program fails to involve multiple community agencies.
What are some of those weaknesses that you suspect?
I suspect that CIT may have become more of a training program and not some of the layers that make CIT successful.
Including command-level police officers.
To what extent is that nurturing happening in other areas of the department? Does the frontline supervisors or all levels of supervisors understand the role of CIT?
CIT is more than training. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
What's lacking in the department?
Well, I don't want to say anything's lacking in the department.
Instead, Cleveland's public safety director points to more than 6,000 calls for mental health assistance last year. 2/3 involved potentially violent disturbances or suicide.
And those situations and those letters that we get weekly for officers doing just an outstanding job because they were understanding and caring for that particular family.
But despite more than 6,000 calls involving the mentally ill, the man who now heads up the mental health agency training cops makes a stunning revelation.
In a given year, how many times does the Cleveland Police Department meet with you on a regular basis?
Well,
on a regular basis?
Probably very, very few times.
How many times over that period of time would you say the department or its representative or yourself has met with Bill Denahan's office on a regular basis in sit-downs to discuss the program?
There again, I can't give you a definitive number, but I know it was numerous times that I personally met with Mr. Denahan, Director
Numerous
Denahan,
times.
and representatives from the Division of Police.
So who's to blame for the failures and who's doing it right? I'll take you inside another police department where crisis training is a model program for others.